Chapter 13 of The Wrong Box. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For further information or to volunteer, please go to LibriVox.org. Reading by Andy Minter. The Wrong Box by Robert Louis Stevenson and Lloyd Osborne. Chapter 13. The Tribulations of Morris, Part the Second. In a really polite age of literature, I would have scorned to cast my eye again on the contortions of Morris, but the study is in the spirit of the day. It presents, besides, features of a high, almost a repulsive morality, and if it should prove the means of preventing any respectable and inexperienced gentleman from plunging light-heartedly into crime, even political crime, this work will not have been penned in vain. He rose on the morrow of his night with Michael, rose from the leaden slumber of distress, to find his hand tremulous, his eyes closed with rheum, his throat parched, and his digestion obviously paralysed. "Lord knows it's not from eating," Morris thought, and as he dressed he reconsidered his position under several heads. Nothing will so well depict the troubled seas in which he was now voyaging as a review of these various anxieties. I have thrown them, for the reader's convenience, into a certain order, but in the mind of one poor human equal they whirled together like the dust of hurricanes. With the same obliging preoccupation I have put a name to each of his distresses, and it will be observed with pity that every individual item would have graced and commended the cover of a railway novel. Anxiety the first. Where is the body? Or the mystery of Bent Pitman. It was now manifestly plain that Bent Pitman, as was to be looked for from his ominous appellation, belonged to the darker order of the criminal class. An honest man would not have cashed the bill. A humane man would not have accepted in silence the tragic contents of the water butt. A man who was not already up to the hilts in gore would have lacked the means of secretly disposing them. This process of reasoning left a horrid image of the monster, Pitman. Doubtless he had long ago disposed of the body, dropping it through a trap-door in his back kitchen, Morris supposed, with some hazy recollection of a picture in a penny dreadful. And doubtless the man now lived in wanton splendour on the proceeds of the bill. So far all was peace. But with the profligate habits of a man like Bent Pitman, who was no doubt a hunchback into the bargain, £800 could be easily melted in a week. When they were gone, what would he be likely to do next? A hell-like voice in Morris's own bosom gave the answer: blackmail me. Anxiety the second. The fraud of the tontine, or is my uncle dead? This, on which all Morris's hopes depended, was yet a question. He had tried to bully Tina. He had tried to bribe her, and nothing came of it. He had his moral convictions still, but you cannot blackmail a sharp lawyer on a moral conviction. And besides, since his interview with Michael, the idea wore a less attractive countenance. Was Michael the man to be blackmailed? And was Morris the man to do it? Grave considerations. It's not that I'm afraid of him, Morris so far condescended to reassure himself, but I must be very certain of my ground, and the deuce of it is I see no way. How unlike his life to novels! I wouldn't even have begun this business in a novel, but what I'd have met a dark, slouching fellow in the Oxford Road, who'd have become my accomplice, and known all about how to do it, and probably broken into Michael's house at night and found nothing but a waxwork image, and then blackmailed or murdered me. But here, in real life, I might walk the streets till I dropped dead, and none of the criminal classes would look near me. Oh, to be sure, there's always Pitman, he added thoughtfully. Anxiety the third. The cottage at Browndean, or the underpaid accomplice. For he had an accomplice, and that accomplice was blooming unseen in a damp cottage in Hampshire, with empty pockets. What could be done about that? He really ought to have sent him something, if it was only a post office order for 5 bob, enough to prove that he was kept in mind, enough to keep him in hope, beer, and tobacco. What would you have? Thought Morris, and ruefully poured into his hand a half crown, a florin, and eightpence in small change. For a man in Morris's position, at war with all society, and conducting, with the hand of inexperience, a widely ramified intrigue, the sum was already a derision. John would have to be doing, no mistake of that. But then, asked the hell like voice, how long is John likely to stand it? Anxiety the fourth, the leather business, or the Shutters at Last, a tale of the city. On this head Morris had no news. He had not yet dared to visit the family concern, yet he knew he must delay no longer; and if anything had been wanted to sharpen this conviction, Michael's references of the night before rang ambiguously in his ear. Well and good. To visit the city might be indispensable, but what was he to do when he was there? He had no right to sign in his own name, and with all the will in the world he seemed to lack the art of signing with his uncle's. Under these circumstances Morris could do nothing to procrastinate the crash; and when it came, when prying eyes began to be applied to every joint of his behaviour, two questions could not fail to be addressed, sooner or later, to a speechless and perspiring insolvent. Where is Mr Joseph Finsbury? And how about your visit to the bank? Questions, how easy to put! Ye gods, how impossible to answer! The man to whom they should be addressed went certainly to jail. Nay, what was this? Possibly to the gallows. Morris was trying to shave when this idea struck him, and he laid the razor down. Here, in Michael's words, was the total disappearance of a valuable uncle. Here was a time of inexplicable conduct on the part of a nephew who had been in bad blood with the old man any time these 7 years. What a chance for a judicial blunder! But no, thought Morris, they cannot, they dare not make it murder. Not that. But honestly, and speaking as a man to a man, I don't see any other crime in the calendar, except arson, that I don't seem somehow to have committed. And yet I'm a perfectly respectable man, and wish nothing but my due. Law is a pretty business. With this conclusion firmly seated in his mind, Morris Finsbury descended to the hall of the house in John Street, still half shaven. There was a letter in the box. He knew the handwriting. John at last. Oh, well, I think I might have been spared this, he said bitterly, and tore it open. Dear Morris, it ran. What the dickens do you mean by it? I'm in an awful hole down here. I have to go on tick, and the parties on the spot don't cotton to the idea. They couldn't, because it's so plain I'm in a state of destitution. I've got no bedclothes. Think of that! I must have coins. The whole thing's a mockery. I won't stand it. Nobody would. I would have come away before, only I have no money for the railway fare. Don't be a lunatic, Morris. You don't seem to understand my dreadful situation. I have to get the stamp on tick. A fact. Ever your affectionate brother, J. Finsbury. Can't even spell, Morris reflected, as he crammed the letter in his pocket and left the house. What can I do for him? I have to go to the expense of a barber, I'm so shattered. How can I send anybody coins? It's hard times, I dare say, but does he think I'm living on hot muffins? One comfort, was his grim reflection, he can't cut and run. He has got to stay. He's as helpless as the dead. And then he broke forth again. Complains, does he? And he's never even heard of Bent Pitman. If he had what I had on my mind, he might complain with a good grace. But these were not honest arguments, or not wholly honest. There was a struggle in the mind of Morris. He could not disguise from himself that his brother John was as miserably situated at Browndean, without news, without money, without bedclothes, without society or any entertainment; and by the time he had been shaved and picked a hasty breakfast at a coffee tavern, Morris had arrived at a compromise. Poor Johnny, he said to himself, he's in an awful box. I can't send him coins, but I'll tell you what I'll do. I'll send him the pink 'un. It'll cheer John up, and besides, it'll do his credit good getting anything by post. Accordingly, on his way to the leather business, whither he proceeded,